Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture. So, just to recap, we have seen till now we have seen various cryptographic assumptions in the context of cyclic groups, namely the D-log assumption, CDH assumption, DDH assumptions, and we have also seen candidate cyclic groups where we believe that those assumptions indeed hold, namely those problems are indeed difficult to solve. In this lecture, we will see some cryptographic applications of the discrete log assumption, namely we will see provably secure compression function in the standard model, and we will also see that how based on discrete log assumption we can design provably secure commitment scheme in the standard model. So, remember we had already seen instantiations of compression function and also instantiation of commitment scheme based on hash function, but their proofs were not in the standard model, in the sense the proofs were given in the random oracle model, which makes very strong assumptions from the underlying hash function. But in this lecture we will see that how we can instantiate compression function, commitment schemes and give proofs without making any unconventional assumptions. So, just to recall the D-log problem and the D-log assumption, the D-log problem is you are given the description of a cyclic group, the group operation and the generator, and you are given a random element from the group. Your goal is basically to come up with the discrete log of that random element in polynomial amount of time, and the D-log assumption states that if we say that the D-log assumption holds in that group, if no polytime algorithm can solve the D-log challenge except with negligible probability. And now we know at least two candidates group where the D-log problem is believed to be hard, namely we can use the group ZP star with the underlying operation being multiplication modulo p, or we can take a prime order subgroup of ZP star, or we can take the group to be the group based on the points on elliptic curves modulo p and underlying operation being the plus operation. So, we will assume a multiplicative group, but whatever we are going to discuss in this lecture, the steps can be simply modified, or the steps of those cryptographic primitives can be simply modified for a cyclic group where the underlying operation is addition. So, let us see the first application, namely constructing fixed length collision resistant compression functions, and for that let me recall the way we have constructed arbitrary length compression functions or hash functions using the Merkle-Damgard transformation. So, what the Merkle-Damgard transformation does for you is it takes an arbitrary input and gives you a fixed size hash for that, and for that we transform the input into a padded input to ensure that every block of the message is a multiple of n bits, and then we do a chaining here. We compute a hash chain where in each iteration we take a current block of the message and the output of the previous hash or the output of the previous instance of the compression function, and then again apply an instance of the fixed size compression function, and the overall output of the hash function is taken as the output of the last instance of the compression function. And we have proved that if the underlying compression function little h is collision resistant, that means in polytime it is difficult to come up with a collision for the fixed size compression function, then the resultant hash function that we obtain by applying this Merkle-Damgard transformation is also collision resistant. Now, the question is how we construct this fixed length collision resistant compression function, which takes two inputs, or namely an input of size L plus n bits, which can be passed as two inputs, one of size L bits and another of size n bits, and gives you an output of n bits. And we know two approaches for this. One approach is based on number theoretic assumptions, which we are going to see in this lecture, but however they are not used practically. The construction that we are aware of and which we have proved to be secure is based on block ciphers, namely the Davis-Meyer construction. However, the security proof of that construction was in the unconventional model, namely in the random oracle model. So, in this lecture we are going to see the construction based on the number theoretic assumptions, whose security can be given just based on the discrete log assumption. So, what we are given here is we are given the description of a publicly known cyclic group where the group operation is a multiplicative operation, that is this is without loss of generality, and we are given a publicly known generator, and as a setup we are also given a uniformly random element from the group whose discrete log is not known to anyone. So, this is a one time setup which we assume is done by a trusted entity, not by an adversary, but once this setup is done, we can use this setup for polynomial amount of time or polynomial number of instances. Now, using this setup, our goal is to design a collision resistant function which I call as HDL or H sub DL based on the discrete log function, and it takes a pair of input where the first input is from the set ZQ and another input is from the set ZQ, and output is going to be a element from the group, and the security, namely the collision resistance of the construction that we are going to design, should be based on the D-log assumption. So, you can interpret the function HDL that we are trying to construct as a function which takes two inputs of size n minus 1 bits by encoding n minus 1 length bit strings to elements of ZQ. This is because I am assuming here that the size of Q is n, namely the number of bits that I need to represent Q is n. So, there exist certain groups where I do not need to do encoding. Naturally, every n minus 1 length bit string can be mapped to an element of ZQ, but if that is not the case, I can do some kind of encoding and I can encode every n minus 1 length bit string as an element of ZQ. So, we can imagine that this function HDL which we are interested to compute takes an input of overall size of 2 times n minus 1 bits, which can be passed as 2 chunks of n minus 1 bits each and again which are mapped to 2 respective elements of ZQ. And suppose the elements of the group are encoded as L bit strings, then it turns out that if 2 n minus 2 is greater than little l, then we can view this function HDL which we are going to construct as a collision resistant function. And indeed there are several cases where indeed 2 n minus 2 is greater than L. For example, if we take G, the group G to be a prime order subgroup of ZP star, where P is say 2 times Q plus 1, namely it consists of all quadratic residues, then your L is nothing but n plus 1, because the size of P will be 1 bit more than the size of Q. And in that case clearly 2 n minus 2 is greater than L, and hence if we instantiate HDL on this group, this particular group of prime order subgroups of ZP star based on quadratic residues, then the resultant HDL function can be viewed as a compression function. So, before going into the construction of the compression function, let us see a definition here. So, remember, as part of setup you are given a uniformly random element H from the group apart from the generator as well. Now, we define what we call as the representation of a group element relative to the base G and H. So, for any group element U belonging to the group G, we say a pair alpha comma beta from the set ZQ from any pair of element alpha comma beta from ZQ is called as a representation of the element U relative to the base G and H if the relationship U is equal to G to the power alpha H to the power beta holds. So, again I stress this whole discussion is with respect to the assumption that my underlying operation is a multiplicative operation, but again all these definitions and discussion can be carried over for the cyclic group where the underlying operation is the additive group. So, we have the definition of a representation of a element with respect to the relative to G and H. Now, with respect to these definitions we have certain facts here. The first fact is that if you take any element U from the group G, then there exist exactly q number of distinct representations of the same element U relative to G and H. What that means is that if you fix any arbitrary beta from the set ZQ, then corresponding to that fixed beta there exists a unique alpha from the set ZQ such that the relationship G of alpha is equal to U times the multiplicative inverse of H beta holds. And that is why for 1 beta you will obtain a corresponding alpha 1 which will be a representation where such that alpha 1 comma beta 1 will be a representation of U. In the same way, if you fix another beta say beta 2, that will imply another alpha 2 such that alpha 2 comma beta 2 is the representation of same element U and so on. So, like that how many betas you can fix? You can have q number of betas because the range of beta is the set ZQ, and that is why the range of corresponding alphas is also ZQ, and that is why you have exactly q number of distinct representations of any given element U. So, that is the first fact. The second fact is that if you are given 2 distinct representations for the same element U, then you can extract out the discrete log of the random element h to the base g. Why that? So, imagine you are given two distinct representations of the same element u, say alpha comma beta is one of the representations and alpha dash comma beta dash is another representation, both representing the same element u relative to g and h. That means, these two equations hold, and since alpha and beta and alpha dash beta dash are distinct, that means pairwise alpha comma beta is different from alpha dash comma beta dash. Now, if both these relations hold, then I can do the substitution and obtain that g to the power alpha minus alpha dash is same as h to the power beta dash minus beta. And now, I claim that beta dash minus beta is non-zero, because if beta dash minus beta is 0, then h to the power 0 is 1, and h to the power 0 is 1, that means the identity element, which is possible only if alpha minus alpha dash is also 0, which automatically implies that alpha is equal to alpha dash and beta is equal to beta dash, which is contradiction to the assumption that alpha comma beta is different from alpha dash comma beta dash. That means, beta dash minus beta is non-zero, and since it is non-zero, then I can always compute the multiplicative inverse of beta dash minus beta, which I denote by delta modulo q, and given beta dash and given beta, the inverse, namely the value delta modulo q, can be computed in Pauli n time. There exist well known algorithms for computing this value delta, which I am not discussing here, but you have to believe me that if beta dash minus beta is non-zero, then the multiplicative inverse of beta dash minus beta, namely delta modulo q, exists, which can be computed in Pauli time. So, if we can compute delta in Pauli time, and if we are given g and if we are given alpha and alpha dash, then we can clearly see that g to the power alpha minus alpha dash and in the exponent multiplied by delta will give you the value h, which means that the discrete log of h to the base g is nothing but alpha minus alpha dash multiplied by delta modulo q. So, that means, if someone can give you two distinct representations for any element u from the group G, then using that element algorithm or using the pair alpha comma beta and alpha dash comma beta dash, we can compute the discrete log of h to the base G as well, and that forms the basis of computing our compression function or constructing our compression function that we are interested in. Okay. So, the construction of the collision resistant compression function is as follows. So, as a setup, we are given a uniformly random element, and to compress the input pair alpha comma beta as per this function h of dl, what we have to do, basically we have to compute the value g to the power alpha h to the power beta, that is the overall output. And I claim here that if the D-log assumption is true in the underlying group G, that means if the D-log problem is indeed difficult to solve in Pauli time in the underlying group G, then indeed this function h sub dl is a fixed length collision resistant function. Why so? This is because finding a collision for this function h of dl means coming up with two distinct representations for some element u from the group related to G and h, and as we have seen in the last slide, if we have two distinct representations for some group element, then it automatically means we know how to compute the discrete log of a random h to the base G, which goes against the assumption that the discrete log problem is difficult to solve in the group. So, let us formally establish this whole implication by a reduction here. So, imagine we have a Pauli time algorithm who knows how to find collision in the function h sub dl. Using that algorithm, we construct another algorithm which can solve an instance of discrete log problem in the group G. So, this adversary a sub dl, it participates in an invocation of the discrete log experiment with respect to the group G. Then as part of the challenge for that experiment, the challenger of the discrete log experiment picks a random x and gives the challenge h, which is g to the power x, and the goal of this adversary a sub dl is to extract out this x. What it does is it invokes the adversary h a sub h dl and participates in an instance of the collision resistance experiment, and as part of that experiment what it does is it creates a setup where the group description is the same group G where the adversary a sub dl wants to solve the discrete log problem, and as a part of setup h is given as the public setup where H is uniformly random. So, you see that the H that is thrown as a challenge to the discrete log solver is used now as a setup for this HDL sub function. Now, as per the property of this collision finder algorithm, it can come up with a collision, namely it comes up with a hash value u, which has which could be the hash value of alpha comma beta as well as the hash value of alpha dash comma beta dash, such that alpha comma beta and alpha dash comma beta dash are different, but their hash values are u. And as per the description of HDL function, since the hash of alpha beta and the hash of alpha dash beta dash is u, that means this relationship holds. So, now what this adversary A sub dl does is, as soon as it sees that adversary A H sub dl is giving a collision, by using the mathematics that we had seen in the last slide, it ends up computing the discrete log of H to the base g, namely it computes alpha minus alpha dash multiplied by the multiplicative inverse of beta dash minus beta modulo q, and you can see that the running time of the adversary A sub dl is exactly the same as the running time of adversary A H sub dl. And relationship wise, we can say that the probability that the D log solver wins its experiment, namely it wins the instance of the discrete log experiment, is exactly the same as the probability with which the collision finder algorithm wins the collision finding algorithm against the HDL function. But since we are assuming that the D log assumption holds in our group G, then we know that for any polytime algorithm, the probability that it can win an instance of discrete log in the group G is negligible. That means, the left hand side probability is always upper bounded by a negligible function. That automatically implies that the probability in the right hand side of the expression is also bounded by a negligible probability. So, that establishes the fact that the function HDL that we have constructed indeed constitutes a collision resistant compression function. Now, let us see the second application of applying the discrete log assumption. So, here we are now going to instantiate a commitment scheme where the proof will be in the standard model, and just to recall, a commitment scheme is a scheme or a cryptographic primitive involving two entities, namely a sender and a receiver, and it is a two phase protocol. In the commit phase, a sender invokes a protocol commit or com, and in the opening phase an open protocol is executed. So, in the commit phase, the sender has a message m from some message space which it wants to commit to the receiver, and to do that sender basically computes a fixed length commitment of the message, which I denote by C, and it sends the commitment C to the receiver R. And the security property that we require from this COM protocol is that if the receiver is a bad guy and computationally bounded, then by seeing the commitment it should not learn what exactly is committed inside C. So, from its viewpoint, the C should view like a sealed envelope. It cannot see what exactly is the message which has been kept inside the commitment. The second protocol is the opening protocol, which implements the opening phase, where sender reveals the message by providing some kind of opening information, and once the opening information is provided, R verifies the opening information and opens the sealed envelope, and based on certain criteria it either accepts or rejects the value which is revealed now in the opening phase. And the security property that we require here is that if the sender is bad and the receiver is honest, then it should not be possible for a corrupt sender to open a commitment C in two different ways, namely it should be binded to whatever it has committed in the commit phase. So, before going into the construction of the commitment scheme in the standard model, let me also recall how we model the hiding property and the binding property. So, the hiding property is modeled by the hiding experiment, where the adversary submits a pair of message from the message space, and one of those messages is committed randomly by choosing some uniform randomness from the randomness space by the challenger, and the challenge commitment is C star, which could be either a commitment of M0 or a commitment of M1 with equal probability, and the challenge for the adversary is to identify whether it is seeing a commitment of M0 or whether it is seeing a commitment of M1. And we say that the output of the experiment is 1, or adversary wins the experiment if it can correctly identify whether it is seeing a commitment of M0 or M1. And the security definition is, we say that a commitment scheme or commitment protocol COM satisfies the hiding property if the probability of any polytime adversary winning this experiment is upper bounded by half plus some negligible probability, or stated otherwise, it does not matter whether the C star is a commitment of M0 or whether C star is a commitment of M1, the output of the adversary should almost be the same, say B dash equal to 1, except with negligible probability. And the way we have formalized the binding experiment, binding requirement is by the binding experiment, where adversary simply submits a commitment C and a pair of message comma randomness MS and another pair of message comma randomness say M star comma S star, such that M comma S, such that M and M star are different, but still the commitment of M with respect to the randomness S and the commitment of M star with respect to the randomness S star turns out to be the same value C. And we say that the algorithm COM has binding property if the probability that any polytime adversary could come up with a pair of different messages committing to the same commitment is upper bounded by a negligible probability. So, now what we are going to do is we are going to see a very nice commitment scheme which is called as Pedersen's commitment scheme, which provides you the hiding property, binding property, and its security is just based on the D log assumption. So, the public setup that is given as part of the commitment scheme is the description of the cyclic group, the group order, and a uniformly random group element from the group whose discrete log is not known to anyone. So, this is like a trusted setup done by a trusted third party, and it is done once for all. Once it is done, we can use it to instantiate or invoke polynomial number of invocations of the commitment scheme. And in the commitment scheme, in the Pedersen's commitment scheme, the message space is basically ZQ. That means, the sender would like to commit any value in the range 0 to q minus 1, and the randomness space is also going to be the set ZQ. So, the commitment phase or the COM protocol is as follows. So, suppose sender wants to commit a value alpha, which could be any value in the range 0 to q minus 1. To commit that, sender picks a uniformly random beta from the randomness space, namely ZQ, and it computes the commitment function which I denote as petcom of the value alpha under the randomness beta, which is nothing but g to the power alpha h to the power beta. And I denote that commitment by this notation. So, C denotes the commitment and the subscripts alpha and beta denotes that this is a string or a group element which is a commitment of some unknown value alpha with respect to the randomness beta. So, in the subscript, the first component denotes the value which is committed and the second component denotes the randomness which is used to compute that commitment. The opening phase is straightforward. So, imagine receiver has an existing commitment available with it which it has obtained in a commitment phase, and say sender has committed alpha with respect to the randomness beta. Now, it provides the opening information which I denote by alpha dash and beta dash. If sender is honest, then alpha dash will be same as alpha and beta dash will be same as beta, whereas if the sender is corrupt and if it wants to reveal a different message in the existing commitment, then it might submit alpha dash beta dash different from alpha comma beta. To verify whether the revealing information or the opening information is correct or not, receiver does the following: it recomputes the commitment with respect to the provided alpha dash and beta dash, namely it computes g to the power alpha dash into h to the power beta dash and compare it with the existing commitment that it has. If it matches, then it outputs alpha or outputs 1, basically it accepts alpha dash, otherwise it rejects alpha dash. So, now what we are going to prove here is that if the D log assumption is true in the underlying cyclic group, then the petcom function that we have defined here satisfies the binding property. And this simply follows from the fact that if you see closely, then the petcom function that we have defined here is exactly the same as the compression function h sub dl that we have defined just previously. That means, breaking the binding property of this Pedersen commitment function is equivalent to coming up with a pair of values alpha beta and alpha dash beta dash, right, such that the commitment function petcom when computed on alpha beta and when evaluated on computed on alpha dash beta dash gives you the same value, say C sub alpha comma beta. And that means, basically one knows how to find out a collision for the function h sub dl, and if one knows how to compute or find collisions in the function h sub dl with significant probability in polynomial amount of time, then we know how to compute the discrete log of this random h with respect to the base g in polynomial amount of time with a significant probability, but that goes against the assumption that discrete log assumption is true in the underlying group. So, that means if at all the binding property is broken, then we know the discrete log problem is also easily solvable in the group, which is against the assumption that the discrete log problem is difficult in my group. So, that proves your binding property. So, now let us try to prove the hiding property. So, remember the goal of the hiding protocol is the goal of the hiding property is that if the sender is honest and if the receiver is malicious, then by just looking into the commitment C alpha comma beta, C sub alpha beta, it cannot find out whether it is seeing a commitment of M0 or whether it is seeing a commitment of M1. Namely, if we see the hiding experiment played with respect to the Pedersen's commitment scheme, then here is how the hiding experiment will look. The adversary might submit a pair of messages, say alpha 0 alpha 1, and the challenger would have randomly picked any of those two messages for committing, and to commit it picks a uniform randomness beta and computes the Pedersen commitment of the message alpha sub beta alpha sub b, and the goal of the adversary is to find out whether it is seeing a commitment of alpha 0 or whether it is seeing a commitment of alpha 1. So, what we can prove now is that this Pedersen commitment scheme satisfies the hiding property even against a computationally unbounded adversary, and this comes from the fact that this Pedersen commitment function is exactly the same as the compression function h sub dl, and what it means is that the commitment that the adversary is seeing, it has exactly q number of distinct representations relative to g and h, and each of these representations are equiprobable. That means, for every candidate alpha sub b, whether it could be alpha sub 0, alpha sub 1, alpha sub 2 or any alpha from the message space, there exists a unique randomness, say beta sub b, such that the commitments that the adversary is seeing could be the commitment of the message alpha sub b under that randomness beta. But the actual randomness which is used by the sender or which is actually picked by the challenger in the hiding experiment is randomly chosen from the set ZQ, which means that the probability that alpha 0 is committed in this commitment C sub alpha b beta, and the probability that the commitment that adversary is seeing could be the commitment of message alpha 1 is exactly the same, with probability 1 over q the commitment that the adversary is seeing could be the commitment of alpha 0, and with the same probability it could be the commitment of alpha 1, and this holds even if my adversary is computationally unbounded. That proves the hiding property. So, I would like to end up this lecture with another interesting feature of this Pedersen's commitment scheme, which we call as the homomorphism property. So, I am retaining the commit phase and the opening phase of the Pedersen's commitment scheme, and this Pedersen's commitment scheme is linearly homomorphic. What exactly I mean by that is, imagine you are given a commitment of some unknown alpha with respect to an unknown randomness beta 1. So, you just know the commitment, yet you do not know what exactly is the value which is committed and what is the corresponding randomness. And in the same way, imagine you are given a commitment of another unknown alpha 2 under with respect to an unknown randomness beta 2, and say you know public constants C1 and C2 belonging to the set ZQ. Now, the way Pedersen commitment function is defined, if we take the commitment of alpha 1 and raise it to C1, then it turns out that we basically ends up getting a value which can be treated as the commitment of the value C1 times alpha 1 under the randomness C1 times beta 1. In the same way, if we take the second commitment, namely the commitment of the unknown alpha 2 and raise it to the known C2, basically we end up getting a Pedersen commitment, a value which can be treated as a Pedersen commitment of the value C2 times alpha 2 with respect to the randomness C2 times beta 2. I stress here that you are just basically performing operations on the commitment, but by performing those operations on the commitment you are getting something which can be treated as commitment of some another value. And now, if I take these two computed commitments, basically I end up getting a value which can be treated as a Pedersen commitment of the value C 1 times alpha 1 plus C 2 times alpha 2 with respect to the randomness C 1 times alpha 1 plus C 2 times beta 2. What it means that any linear function of the committed values can be computed locally by just performing some operations on the commitments. That means, even though you do not know what exactly is alpha 1, what exactly is alpha 2, if someone has committed alpha 1 and given you the sealed alpha 1 and a sealed alpha 2 in the form of commitment, and if you want to perform a sealed commitment of some linear function of alpha 1 and alpha 2, namely a function of the form C 1 times alpha 1 plus C 2 times alpha 2, where the linear combiners of the linear function, namely C 1 and C 2, are known to you, then even without knowing alpha 1 and alpha 2 and the randomness beta 1 beta 2, you could perform operations on the commitment itself, which will end up giving you the Pedersen commitment of some linear function of the unknown underlying values, and that is what we mean by the linearly homomorphic property. So, it turns out that this linearly homomorphic property of the Pedersen commitment scheme can be exploited in advanced cryptographic primitives like secure multi-party computation. So, that brings me to the end of this lecture. Just to summarize, in this lecture we have seen the applications of discrete log assumption, namely we have seen an instantiation of fixed length compression function, and we have seen an instantiation of commitment scheme, namely Pedersen's commitment scheme, and a security of both these primitives are in the standard model, and their security can be proved based on this hardness based on the discrete log hardness assumption. Thank you.